Nathaniel Caldwell didn't blink when his grandfather's lawyer handed him the sealed envelope that would change everything. The old man was gone, and with his passing came one final demand: marriage. Not love, not partnership, just a legal union before the next 30 days ticked off the calendar. If Nate failed, he would lose Caldwell Holdings, the real estate empire he'd spent a decade building from the inside out. Marriage had never been in Nate's plans. Love was a facade people clung to before watching it rot. He'd seen what it did, how it blinded, how it betrayed. His own past bore scars deep enough to warn him never to fall for that illusion again. But business was clean, controlled, cold. So he did what he did best, found a loophole. Her name was Evelyn Hart. The private investigator had called her a perfect candidate. She was a quiet librarian from the edge of the city with mounting medical debt, a dying mother lost to cancer last year, and a sick younger brother who depended on her for everything. Her life was a string of unpaid bills and sleepless nights. She had no scandals, no skeletons, and no secrets. Just struggle. Nate skimmed her profile without emotion until his gaze snagged on the photograph. She was beautiful, but not in the way socialites tried to be. She had natural, disarming beauty, delicate features, skin like porcelain, emerald eyes filled with quiet defiance, and waves of honey blonde hair that tumbled freely to her shoulders. There was something unpolished, honest, and haunting about her. "Set up a meeting," Nate ordered, sliding the file aside. "Let's close this deal." Evelyn Hart stared at the letter in her hands, her heart pounding. A marriage proposal, not for love, but for survival. A man she'd never met offering her $1 million to play pretend for 1 year. It sounded like a trap, like something out of a bad romance novel. But it was real. The signature was real. The numbers were real. And so was her brother's medical diagnosis: end-stage kidney disease. She'd already sold everything she could to keep him on dialysis. She was out of options. The next morning, she stood in front of Caldwell Tower, a place so intimidating it seemed to breathe a different kind of air. She wore her best thrifted dress, kept her chin up, and walked into Nate Caldwell's office like she belonged there, even though everything inside her screamed that she didn't. Nate didn't stand to greet her. He watched her with a calculating gaze, his tailored suit crisp, his jaw sharp, and his piercing blue eyes far too perceptive. "You're prettier in person," he said flatly. "That'll help." Evelyn stiffened. "I'm not for display, Mr. Caldwell." He smirked as if amused. Most women swooned in his presence. This one stood taller. "I need the money," she said firmly, ignoring the tightness in her throat. "But I have one condition." Nate leaned back in his chair, curious. "Go on." "No intimacy, no physical expectations. None." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "You're a virgin?" Evelyn's face flushed, but she didn't deny it. "Interesting," he said, tapping a finger on his desk. "Unnecessary, but fine. No touching, no expectations. Just a contract marriage, strictly business." She hesitated, then nodded. And just like that, her signature joined his on paper. Her future sold for 1 year. The wedding was private, just a judge, 2 witnesses, and silence. Evelyn wore a simple white dress. Nate barely looked at her as he slipped the ring on her finger. It was the coldest union imaginable. But later that night, when Evelyn stepped out of the bathroom in a silk gown that clung to her every curve, something changed. Nate's breath hitched. He wasn't supposed to feel anything. This was a transaction, a performance. But the way she looked at him, nervous, vulnerable, untouchably beautiful, sent a crack through the armor he wore so well. And for the first time in years, Nathaniel Caldwell felt something dangerously close to hesitation. Why was he suddenly afraid to touch her? She was just a contract. So why did her presence burn into his soul like a promise? The first thing Evelyn noticed about Nate's penthouse was how empty it felt, like a place designed to be admired, not lived in. Gleaming marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the Manhattan skyline. Not a photo in sight. No warmth, just cold perfection. She stepped inside, suitcase in hand, and felt like an imposter in a glass museum. Nate didn't bother to show her around. "Your room is down the hall, second door on the left." I'll have housekeeping bring up new linens, he said without looking at her. So much for a honeymoon. They didn't talk much after that, just sat down with legal pads like two business partners outlining a merger. The rules were clear. She'd appear with him at social events, smile when necessary, and stay quiet when preferred. Behind closed doors, they'd live separate lives. No touching, no jealousy, no personal questions, Nate added, pouring himself a glass of scotch. We keep this clean, predictable. Agreed, Evelyn said, her voice steadier than she felt. But the tension between them wasn't predictable. Not even close. Over the next week, Evelyn slipped into the role of Mrs. Caldwell with careful precision. She wore the designer dresses his assistant picked out. She attended boardroom dinners, ribbon cuttings, and wine galas, and each time, she caught people staring. Not at her, but at Nate. He wasn't acting like himself. The arrogant billionaire who once barked orders now lingered beside her, subtly placing a hand on her back as they walked through crowds. He pulled out her chair at dinner. He actually listened when she spoke. At one gala, an older man made a crude remark about Evelyn's looks. Nate's smile dropped instantly. Watch your mouth, he said, voice like ice. She's not one of your escorts. The room went still. Afterward, Evelyn caught him outside, eyes dark with fury. You didn't have to defend me. I didn't do it for you, Nate muttered. I did it because no one talks to my wife like that. But Evelyn saw the lie. He had done it for her, and that terrified her more than anything else. Then there were the mornings. Evelyn woke up to silence each day, but always found a steaming cup of coffee waiting on the marble counter. No note, no explanation. Just her favorite blend. Perfect every time. She never asked him about it. He never admitted it was him. But she knew, and that silent act, simple, thoughtful, tugged at a part of her heart she wasn't ready to open. But just as the walls started to shift between them, a chill entered her world again. One night after returning from an event, she found a small envelope tucked into her clutch. No name, no address, just one line scrawled in messy ink. He's hiding something. Be careful. Her fingers trembled. She glanced toward the hallway where Nate's door stayed firmly shut. Her mind raced. What was he hiding? She wanted to throw the note away, pretend it didn't matter. But deep down she knew it did. Because even if her heart wasn't supposed to be involved, it already was. The sky broke open with a crack of thunder that shook the windows. Evelyn sat up in bed, her hands clutching the sheets as rain pounded against the penthouse windows like angry fists. The lights flickered, then vanished, plunging the apartment into a suffocating blackness. She hated storms. Always had. The memory of hiding under hospital beds with her little brother during tornado warnings came rushing back, thick with fear and the scent of antiseptic. Her breathing quickened. Shadows stretched across the walls, turning familiar shapes into monsters. She tried to calm herself, reminding her brain that she was safe now, an adult in New York, in a luxury apartment. But her heart wouldn't listen. Without thinking, her feet carried her down the dark hallway. Her fingers trembled as she knocked softly on Nate's door. Nothing. Then the door creaked open, and he stood there in a simple black t-shirt and sweatpants, his usual icy demeanor softened by sleep and surprise. Evelyn? He asked, brows furrowing. I'm sorry, she whispered, voice small. The storm. I needed. He didn't let her finish. He stepped aside and opened the door fully. Come in. Nate's room was dimly lit by the occasional flash of lightning. She sat on the edge of the bed, arms wrapped around herself. She was shaking, and not from the cold. Without a word, he sat beside her. After a moment's hesitation, he reached out and gently pulled her into his arms. No teasing, no smug smile, no business arrangement. Just comfort. Her cheek rested against his chest as the thunder roared again. His heartbeat was steady, calming. She didn't know how long they sat like that, but when the silence stretched, Evelyn did something she hadn't done in years. She let herself be vulnerable. I used to live in a hospital, she murmured, for months at a time, when my brother was fighting for his life. Every time a storm hit, I'd pray it wouldn't knock the machines out. I'd pray he wouldn't stop breathing. Nate didn't speak, but his hand tightened around her waist. I never got to be a kid, she continued. Love, dating, it always felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. And then, someone hurt me, used me. I stopped believing in anything real after that. Her voice cracked. That's why I made the no intimacy rule. Not just physical, I mean real closeness. Because every time I let someone in, they leave a scar. Nate was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes unreadable in the dark. Then he said something she never expected. My ex-fiancée sold our engagement to the tabloids for $500,000. I found out when her texts leaked. She only said yes to me for the exposure. Evelyn turned, stunned. I was young and stupid. I was young and stupid. I built an empire to make sure I'd never feel that powerless again. Since then, love has always felt like a scam, a transaction. Their eyes met, raw and unguarded. I guess we're both broken, she whispered. He gave a hollow laugh. Yeah, but tonight, you're safe with me. No contracts, no rules. Just for tonight. When the storm calmed, Evelyn stayed in his room, curled beside him in silence. There were no kisses, no promises, just the comfort of shared pain, and a spark neither of them wanted to name. The next morning he was already gone for work. But something had changed. Her heart, once frozen in survival mode, had begun to thaw. She wasn't just surviving in Nate Caldwell's world. She was beginning to feel again. But that afternoon, while searching for a book in his study, Evelyn opened the wrong drawer. Inside was a thick file with her name typed across the top. Her hands turned to ice as she flipped it open. Photos, medical records, a background check, even notes about her brother's illness. He had investigated her before the marriage, her vision blurred with betrayal. Had it all been a lie? Evelyn had never been the kind of woman to lose her temper, but today all the carefully constructed walls she'd built around her heart crumbled. The file was in her hands, Nate's meticulous, cold investigation into her past, her life, her brother's illness, and it was all too much. She stormed into his office, slamming the door behind her. Nate was sitting at his desk, completely unaware of the storm about to hit him. Is this how you see me? She demanded, her voice shaking with anger. A business transaction? Just another line on your list of deals? Nate looked up, his face momentarily blank. When he saw the file in her hands, he froze, his blue eyes darkening with guilt. I can explain, he said, rising from his chair, but Evelyn was already shaking her head, backing away. You investigated me, Nate. You didn't even think I was worth getting to know unless I had a background check. You made me feel like a product. She tossed the file onto the desk. All of this, was it just for the money? Was I just a pawn in your game? Nate swallowed hard, the weight of her words hitting him like a physical blow. For a moment he couldn't speak. He could feel his chest tightening, the shame overwhelming him. I'm sorry, he finally whispered, voice hoarse. I thought if I knew everything about you, I could control the situation. I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust anyone. Evelyn's heart ached. She'd known there were no fairy tales in her life, but the realization that she'd been nothing more than an object of study, a checkbox on his to-do list, shattered her. You didn't even give me a chance to choose you, Nate, she said, tears stinging her eyes. You never even tried to see me, Evelyn. Just the idea of me. Your perfect wife. He took a step forward, voice urgent. Evelyn, please. It wasn't just business from the start. It was... I thought I could keep my distance. But then everything changed. You changed everything. Stop, she cut him off, holding her hand out. No more lies. You wanted a wife to fill a role, and now you want something real. But it's too late. Her heart was breaking with each word, but she couldn't bear to stay and let him destroy what little was left of her trust. I'm done, she said, her voice breaking. I can't do this anymore. With that, she turned on her heel and walked out of the room. She barely noticed the tears running down her face as she reached for her coat and grabbed her purse. She had to get out. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think with the weight of his betrayal suffocating her. But as she reached the front door, she heard him, his voice raw with emotion, calling her name. Evelyn didn't look back. She didn't want to see the desperation in his eyes. She reached for the door handle, but it didn't open. Someone had locked it from the outside. She spun around, and there he was, standing in the doorway, chest heaving. "Please," he said, his voice cracking. "Let me explain." "No, Nate," Evelyn whispered, her chest tight with heartbreak. "You don't get to explain this. You used me. Then why does it feel like I'm losing the only person who has ever made me feel real?" His words hit her like a slap, but she didn't let herself respond. His blue eyes were now filled with anguish, a rawness she had never seen before. It was the first time in the months they'd been together that she saw him so vulnerable, so broken. "I thought love was a weakness," he confessed, stepping closer, his voice trembling. "I thought I could protect myself by pretending it didn't matter. But then you became my strength. You became someone I can't imagine living without." The room was thick with silence, the storm outside now a distant memory. She felt herself swaying between fury and the longing to reach out. She couldn't keep doing this. She couldn't live a life of half-truths. Finally, her voice cracked. "I don't want the contract anymore. I can't keep pretending. You have to tear it apart. You have to choose me. No terms, no conditions, no business. I won't be your pawn. I want us to start fresh, without the rules." Nate's gaze softened. It was like a door had opened between them, a chance to rebuild everything they had torn down. His lips parted, but for once he had no words. He didn't need them. "I'm in," he said, his voice low but certain. Evelyn took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. "Then we start over. We do this right." And in that moment, it was as if the past didn't matter. The contract didn't matter. Only the choice they were about to make together. They were no longer bound by an agreement. They were free to love, or to lose each other forever. Evelyn had always believed that love was something you built in small moments. A smile in the morning, a shared secret over dinner. But with Nate, she was beginning to realize love was more than just moments. It was about sharing everything. Your past, your hopes, your demons. And Nate was slowly unraveling in front of her, each layer peeling away until there was nothing left but raw, unguarded honesty. It started with art. One evening after a long day of work, Nate invited Evelyn to his private study, a quiet room in his penthouse where the world seemed to stop, and the only sound was the scratch of a pencil on paper. There were canvases everywhere, some half-finished, others bold and brilliant, showcasing scenes that revealed more of Nate than any conversation ever could. Evelyn stood in awe, captivated by the way he used colors to express things she didn't know he could feel. "These are incredible," she whispered, running her fingers over one of the paintings. "You've never mentioned this side of you." Nate shrugged, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "I've always kept it private. It's easier to hide behind business deals than to let people see the real you." Evelyn stepped closer to him, her heart warming at the vulnerability in his voice. "I don't think you need to hide from me." And just like that, he let his guard down. He took her hand, leading her to another painting, one that had always been too personal to share with anyone. It was a portrait of a woman, her face veiled in shadow, but the melancholy in her eyes was unmistakable. "This one is her," Nate said quietly, staring at the painting. "My ex-fiancée, Sienna. I thought she was the one. I thought she was everything." Evelyn's heart sank as she looked at the image of a woman she had never met, but whose presence suddenly seemed to fill the room. "What happened?" Nate exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening. "She left me. Not just once, but over and over. She didn't love me. She loved the idea of me, the money, the status. And when I stopped being useful to her, she moved on to someone else. I was too blind to see it until it was too late." Evelyn's hand instinctively reached out to touch his arm, a silent gesture of comfort. She could see the pain in his eyes, the scars that he tried so hard to hide. But she also saw something else. The hope that maybe, just maybe, he could let go of the past and let her be the one to heal him. They spent the evening in silence, letting the weight of his confession hang in the air, the bond between them growing stronger with each passing moment. But even in the quiet, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, something she wasn't prepared for. The next weekend, Nate took Evelyn to her old hometown. It was a small, quiet place, nothing like the fast-paced world he was used to. But there was something peaceful about it, something that made Evelyn feel grounded. She took him to the modest house she had grown up in, where her younger brother Noah was waiting for them. The moment they walked through the door, Noah jumped into her arms, grinning from ear to ear. "Eve!" he exclaimed, his voice full of joy. "You finally came home." Evelyn smiled brightly, her eyes lighting up at the sight of her brother. Nate stood back for a moment, watching the two of them interact. There was no pretense, no walls, just a raw, unconditional love that took his breath away. Evelyn was different here, softer, more real. "You're a good sister," Nate said quietly as they sat down to dinner, his voice almost reverent as he watched her care for Noah, making sure he had everything he needed. "I had to be," Evelyn replied, a bittersweet smile on her lips. "After our parents died, it was just the two of us. He's my world." For the first time, Nate understood her fully. He saw the sacrifices she had made, the strength she had cultivated, all in silence. It was no longer just about the contract. It was about a woman who had fought tooth and nail to keep her family together, no matter what the cost. But as the days passed and Evelyn and Nate grew closer, a shadow began to creep into their happiness. Sienna had returned to town. Nate didn't want to believe it, but when he saw her name on his phone one night, his blood ran cold. "Nate," she purred on the other end of the line, "I think it's time we talk." Evelyn, sitting across the room, could hear the tension in Nate's voice as he reluctantly agreed to meet her. "I'll be there in an hour," he said before hanging up. The next day, Nate was distant. His mind was clearly somewhere else. And that night, the phone call came. It wasn't Nate, but a voicemail from Sienna. The words rang through Evelyn's head, sending a chill down her spine. "Evelyn," Sienna's voice oozed with malice, "I hope you're enjoying your time with Nate. But you should know something. You're nothing more than a gold digger, using him for his money. I'll make sure everyone knows the truth." Evelyn felt her heart drop. She replayed the message in her head over and over again. Was this really happening? Was Nate's past coming back to haunt them? Her phone buzzed with a new message, an anonymous text that made her blood run cold. "Be careful. Sienna won't stop until she destroys you." Evelyn stared at the screen, her mind racing. She knew this was just the beginning. Nate was about to face a battle unlike any other, and so was she. The next few days were filled with tension. Nate couldn't escape the storm that had been brewing ever since Sienna's return. He tried to keep his focus on work, but his mind was constantly drifting back to the one person who had never truly left his thoughts. Evelyn. Despite his attempts to keep her at arm's length, there was no denying it. He was falling for her. His thoughts, his heart, everything inside him was consumed by her, and it terrified him. How had this innocent contract turned into something so real, so personal, so intense? But the deeper Nate fell, the more Evelyn seemed to pull away. She was distant, cold even, and though he could see the pain behind her eyes, he had no idea how to break through her walls. He thought that opening up about his past, about Sienna, would create a bridge between them, but instead it had only left them standing on opposite shores, the distance growing wider with each passing day. Evelyn, for her part, was struggling too. She had begun to see Nate for who he really was, a man who had been hurt, just like her. But the revelation about Sienna had shaken her too. She couldn't shake the feeling that Nate had been hiding pieces of himself from her. And now, with Sienna's threats hanging over them, Evelyn wasn't sure where they stood. Late one evening, as they sat in Nate's penthouse, the weight of unspoken words heavy in the air, a call came through on Evelyn's phone. It was her brother, Noah. He didn't say much, but the urgency in his voice was enough to send a chill through her body. "Eve, something's happened," he said, his voice tight with worry. "I need you to come home. Now." Evelyn's heart raced as she grabbed her coat and made for the door, Nate following close behind. "What's going on?" he asked, his concern evident. "I don't know," Evelyn replied, her voice trembling. "Noah's scared. He says something's wrong." The drive to her hometown felt like an eternity. The familiar streets, once filled with comfort, now seemed foreign and ominous. When they reached the house, Evelyn rushed inside, but what she found was worse than anything she could have imagined. Noah was sitting on the couch, his face pale, his hands shaking. "Eve," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "They came. They—" He paused, swallowing hard before continuing. They told me to tell you to stay away from Nate. They said, they said they'd hurt me if you didn't. Evelyn felt the world tilt beneath her. She knew who they were, Sienna's thugs, the ones she had hired to make her life hell. This was no longer just about her and Nate. This was about something darker, something dangerous. Nate, who had been standing silently by the door, stepped forward, his jaw tight. "Who are they?" he demanded, his voice low and filled with authority. Evelyn shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know, but they're real, Nate, and they're threatening my family." A fire ignited in Nate's eyes. The usually composed billionaire had been pushed too far. This wasn't just a business deal anymore. This was his heart on the line. "I'm going to handle this," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Evelyn tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "Nate, don't. Please don't make things worse." But he was already on his phone, making calls, his mind focused on one thing: protecting her. His past with Sienna might have scarred him, but this was different. He wasn't going to let her ruin what they had, what they could have. He wasn't going to let her tear Evelyn apart. As the minutes stretched on, Evelyn's mind raced. She had never felt so vulnerable, so exposed. But as Nate's protective presence filled the room, something inside her shifted. He wasn't just her husband by contract anymore. He was becoming something more. A man who, despite his scars, was willing to fight for her. Suddenly, her phone buzzed again, and this time it was a text from an unknown number. "Stay away from him, or the consequences will be severe. We're watching." Evelyn's hand trembled as she showed the message to Nate. He read it quickly, then glanced at her, his eyes fierce. "No one threatens the woman I love." For the first time, Evelyn saw the man behind the mask. The ruthless businessman, the cold, calculating millionaire, was gone. In his place stood someone far more dangerous, a man who would destroy anyone who dared to hurt the people he cared about. But even as he made his plans to confront Sienna, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn into a trap, one she might not be able to escape from. Months had passed since the chaos that had nearly torn them apart. The scars of the past still lingered, but Nate and Evelyn had faced them together, stronger than ever. Their love had grown from the shaky foundation of a contract into something real, something unbreakable. They had stood by each other through the darkest times, and now they were standing in the light, hand in hand, on the most important day of their lives. Evelyn stood before the small congregation in her hometown, the scent of spring flowers filling the air. It was a far cry from the extravagant weddings Nate had once been a part of, the lavish, shallow affairs that had meant nothing to him. Today it was just them, their closest friends and family, the life they had built together. And for the first time, Nate could feel his heart swell with a warmth that had always been foreign to him. He glanced at Evelyn, who was standing beside him, her eyes shining with an unspoken promise. She looked radiant in a simple yet elegant dress, her beauty magnified by the love that emanated from her. They had come so far, from the cold, calculated business deal that had started it all to this moment, where they were choosing each other, not out of necessity, but out of desire. Nate had given up everything for this, his empire, the power he had once reveled in. He had traded it all for a future filled with meaning, with Evelyn at his side. Together, they had built a foundation to help families like hers, those who struggled, who needed a hand to lift them up. The man who once believed love was a weakness now stood stronger than ever, with the woman who had taught him how to love in return. "Do you, Nathaniel Caldwell, take Evelyn Hart to be your lawfully wedded wife, to cherish and love, in good times and bad, for as long as you both shall live?" the officiant asked. Nate's voice was steady, his heart full. "I do." The words that had once seemed so foreign to him now came easily. He had come to understand that love wasn't something to fear or avoid. It was the very thing that had made him whole. "And do you, Evelyn Hart, take Nathaniel Caldwell to be your lawfully wedded husband, to honor and love through all that life brings?" Evelyn smiled, her eyes locking with his. "I do." The vows were simple, but in those words they both knew the depth of their commitment. They were no longer bound by a contract or obligation. This was real. This was forever. The moment the officiant declared them husband and wife, Nate pulled her into his arms, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that spoke of everything they had overcome. It was the kiss of a man who had once been empty, now filled with the kind of love he never thought possible. As they walked down the aisle together, hand in hand, Evelyn looked up at him, her smile bright. "I never thought I would be here," she said softly. "I thought I was never meant to have this kind of happiness." Nate smiled back, his hand resting gently on her growing belly. "You were always meant to have it, Evelyn. You just had to believe that you were worthy of it." Their journey had been anything but easy, but it had brought them to this moment, together. They were no longer the people they had once been. They had shed their pasts and built something new, something beautiful. Later that evening, as the sun set and the stars began to twinkle above, they sat together on the porch of the house they had made their home. Evelyn leaned her head on Nate's shoulder, her hand resting on his chest, the sound of their baby's gentle kicks filling the silence between them. The life they had started together was just beginning. Their baby, a little girl named Lila, was soon to arrive, and with her, the promise of even more joy and love. Their hearts were full, their lives richer than they could have ever imagined. Nate kissed her forehead, his voice filled with emotion. "I used to think that love was a weakness, something that made you vulnerable. But now I see that it's the greatest strength you can have, and it's because of you, Evelyn. You've made me whole." Evelyn smiled, her heart swelling with love for the man she had once thought was too broken to love. "I always knew you were capable of loving, Nate. You just had to find the right person to help you see it." As the night deepened, they sat there in the stillness, knowing that no matter what the future held, they had each other, and that was enough.